Welcome to the second session of semester one. Today we're going to talk about different types of depression, how can we use Faradarmani, and also review the certificate of Faradarmani, and talking about the protective layer, as well as perception and worldview, and some definitions that is carefully defined in Interuniversalism, so it can help us to understand how we can use it and all the nuances. So disclaimer again, practicing or imitating the pragmatic part of the system without participating in an official Interuniversalism class or under supervision of an Interuniversalism tutor is strongly discouraged and forbidden. Any action you take upon the pragmatic part is strictly at your own risk. Moving above mentioned situations, you assume full responsibility and a risk for any costs associated with respect to your use of the content. You will not be liable for any cost of any kind. So we talked about this before. I don't need to really explain this again, but for the sake of video, practicing the pragmatic part needs to be under the official Interuniversalism tutor supervision, so people would be safe on the journey and protected by aspects that we will discuss in a moment when we discuss the protective layer. So pragmatic ontology part of this session is receiving the Faradarmani link for short distance use. I will explain what does that mean, short distance. Don't worry about it now. We're going to review the Faradarmani certificate, definition of the depression, explaining worldview and perception, explaining the individual way and unity way of getting connected to supreme consciousness, ways we can use Faradarmani, and explaining what is protective layer. Let's review the certificates together. So when I send it to you to sign, you know what's about in detail and knowing more about the subtlety. Review of certificate on our terms and conditions. Any attempt which hinders the evolution of the collective awareness of humanity. Restraining from and procrastinating in sharing the information awareness. Presenting faulty and misleading information, claiming that the individual has gained such abilities via other means like saints, etc., or rituals or self-developed or self-achieved practices. Utilizing the interuniversal consciousness for the purpose of showing off, displaying power, or boosting ego. So these are the things that we want to avoid. Based on the terms and conditions of the Faradarmani certificate, we are responsible to use it only for the evolution of the collective awareness of humanity. Restraining from and procrastinating in sharing the information basically means that if we try to use Faradarmani, we need to say that that's Faradarmani. We need to say that it's coming from universal consciousness. We should not use it under other names like religious practices or religions in general, any spiritual practice that is not interuniversalism. So we basically staying faithful and authentic to the teachings. So we only say what we received, right? We're trying to keep this safe from going wrong in the long run in the future. When we pass it to our children, it's not going to be like the religions today that maybe their essence were trying to convey a deeper meaning, but what it remained is very dogmatic practices and on the surface must and must not actions that put people under a lot of pressure that they either do it out of fear or they don't want to do it, resist it. So presenting faulty and misleading information, claiming that the individual has gained such an abilities via other means. Basically, an individual using Faradarmani, and a person asks you, okay, what did you do? And I say that, oh, I practiced for 10 years and I cultivate this power myself. Or I would say that I said this mantra, or I did that practice, or I just did this ceremony, and this is the results related to that. Anything that would bring people's attention to us and not the Supreme Consciousness itself. So we're trying to avoid bringing people's attention toward ourselves or towards specific practices, and try to help them understand that they can receive the benefits directly from Supreme Consciousness independently, without relying on any individual or any specific practice. If you remember, we talked about things that we are achieving on a step of logic, earthly matters. These are the things that we can achieve by our willpower, by our effort, by our dedication, and the tools of the world of quantity. But the qualities of quality world, we cannot achieve through using the tools of quantity world. So we are trying to bring that awareness to humanity, that the connection to the source, to the beloved, does not need any tools, doesn't need to be dependent on anyone or any specific practice in a physical way. Utilizing the interuniversal consciousness for the purpose of showing off, displaying power, or boosting ego. I think this is very self-explanatory. I don't need to really explain that so much. If we are using Faradarmani, we are only using it for the sake of helping humanity and not for showing power or boosting ego or self-centered purposes. The second part is any application or usage against the interest of humanity. The tendency for misusing the potentials of interuniversal consciousness towards investigation and infiltration of the affairs of others. Discrimination and prejudice in offering the interuniversal consciousness. If anyone wants to misuse the links in any way, they cannot actually misuse it, but it would attract, or it would invite the equal opposite force, or what we call it, the evolving aspects of consciousness that keeps the justice in place. So they might end up having some difficulties that we are basically explaining why that would be. And that is for trying to misuse interuniversal consciousness potential for something that is not unity-oriented, like investigating and infiltration of the affairs of others is basically the violating someone's confidentiality and privacy, which is not a unity-oriented approach, and it's more like a self-centered or selfish act. Discrimination and prejudice in offering the interuniversal consciousness. A lot of people feel like there's a lot of pressure in this sentence. You're thinking that now they have to invite everyone and offer everyone to use the links. But this is basically, it's more like an intentional thing. Like if you can help someone, you avoid doing it for a specific purpose. It could be a self-centered or selfish purpose, or we are purposely not offering it. So, the other person cannot have that connection, or we would, it might be related to the individual wanting to have superiority over someone else, or it could be many other reasons. I understand in the beginning, it might not be easy to share it with others, like not knowing how to put it in words or how to offer it, or we're not certain ourselves yet. Don't worry about this so much right now. This is more like after you have received the benefit and you are able to actually share it, and you know how to say, but you're doing it more intentionally, or something like that. So tonight I'm going to explain how you can use Faradarmani and open Faradarmani for others. And when you want to offer it, what would you say? You can keep it very simple and easy, that you don't need really any words. And many people would feel that they don't know so much about it, or it's not super clear for them yet, so they don't feel confident sharing it with others. I put it in a very simple way that you can offer it and see the result for yourself, and they can also see the result and use the benefits for themselves. Any application or usage against the interuniversal consciousness network, holding any disrespect or ingratitude toward the network after getting positive results, concealing one's discoveries in this regard. These are all self-explanatory. If you have any questions about it, you can always ask, so I can clarify for you. Definition of the protective layer or shield. The protective layer is made of consciousness and is entrusted upon the paratherapist after completing the routine agreement. This layer, under the control of interuniversal consciousness, protects the paratherapist and also provides the patient with a confidence shield during Faradarmani. This is to protect the paratherapist and the patient against the interference of faulty cellular consciousness, negative emissions, and particularly against the penetration of information field keepers. I will explain what that is later. After receiving the protective layer, first-level students become paratherapists and can apply this treatment on others and themselves. So after the link is assigned to you, each link comes with its protective layer. That's why in disclaimer, we talk about the pragmatic parse needs to be done under the supervision of the official Interuniversalism tutor, because without the protective layer, people would not be protected against the interference of the faulty cellular consciousness, negative emissions, and particularly against the penetration of the information field keepers. So please let us know if you want to use Faradarmani. You can send us a request on our website. If you are not an Interuniversalism student or practitioner, or no one have not yet opened the link for you to use. How pragmatic parts works in Interuniversalism. We touched on this on the last session. We're gonna explain it a little more so we can have a further conversation about the other functionalities. There is two ways that we discuss that we can get connected to the consciousness. One is individual way that we talked about it. It's a hard way, and there's a lot of equal opposite resistance or equal opposite force to stop us from going toward that quality or cultivating that quality. And there's another way that is being done in Interuniversalism, and that is collective way or imitating method is a shared part of Dr. Tari's individual's findings, which explains how to tap into consciousness through halqeh. The condition to connect to be present in a halqeh or link. One is observation, no assumptions, no judgment. We just observe what happens and continue observing while we are in the connection. Observation with no judgment is the research method suggested in this system. The second one is surrender. We rip ourselves off of all earthly method. No prayer, no focus, no techniques, no mantras, etc. are allowed while we are in the connection. The functionality of link, how the link works, is a person who wants to open a link for someone else. In this case, me opening a link for you. Then with that intention, as soon as I intend to the link, the halqeh or the ring is formed, and that is the halqeh of unity. Is basically bringing that emission of consciousness, the field that provides healing in this case. So the request of intention goes to unmanifested consciousness or supreme consciousness, and the interuniversal consciousness as an operator would form the halqeh of unity, which provides the healing aspect. So each person are receiving directly from Supreme Consciousness. So it's not through who is opening the link, but it's directly from Supreme Consciousness. So if I open a link, or after this session, when you get the link, if you open the link, there's no difference, because this is not being affected by how long we are doing it, how experienced we are, how well informed we are, and it's only unconditional relationship between us and unmanifested consciousness or beloved that is established through the links as a part of findings of Dr. Tahiri. In this ontology, we talked about quantity world and quality world and the aspects of each. And we talked about the concept Rind, which was the wise, sane, balanced person who is not sacrificing objective reality of existence for subjective reality of existence, or vice versa, sacrificing the truth for reality or reality for truth. And there is a necessity for us to operate in a balance between these two aspects. So we would operate in an optimal way. In order to understand the fourth creation and all its logic, we talk about what is fourth creation, because when we talk about the levels of creation and layers of consciousness and manifestation, we will talk about what does it mean to be the fourth creation. In order to understand the fourth creation and all its logic, you need to understand and experience the fourth love, or fourth ishq. The only way to understand fourth ishq, which in other words can be called absolute unconditional love, is to use our right brain ability to gather information about the bigger picture of our reality. Interuniversalism commits this process through links, Halqeh. So, in order for us to understand the reason of why we are here, what is the purpose of this creation? The fourth creation is our world. So, in order for us to understand that, we need to experience the fourth ishq. And you might ask, what do you mean by fourth ishq? Is it like one ishq, second ishq, third ishq, and then fourth ishq? Yes, there's layers of ishq, and these are the layers of consciousness existence, the layers of manifestations that we will discuss about it later. But even for us to understand the logic behind our physical reality, we need to gather all the information that is putting together all this existence, which is not all of it based on logic that we can see and measure and comprehend by our logic. But there's so many parts of it, so much of it is on the step of ishq, the quality world, that we cannot understand it through the logic. So the only way to get to that understanding is first to experience the bigger picture and the quality of that manifestations, which is the fourth ishq, or fourth unconditional love. Interuniversalism commits this process through links. There are many links that will facilitate our journey to go from where we are to that optimal operation, so we can receive direct revelations and inner experiences through the link, so we can get closer to what that fourth love is. And then from that place, we can understand the logic beyond our universe. You remember we talked about the example of Apple PhD, how we could bypass all those explanations and all that studies about introducing an apple based on logic. This is what it needs to happen, basically, that we understand apple in that case by only passing someone an apple, besides explaining that. So through the links, after we experience that fourth love, or fourth ishq, which is the causality of our existence, then we know all about it. Then we can understand so many things about it. Like after you have a bite of an apple, you can know so much about apple. So the partial wisdom, and regardless of how wise we are still perceiving a bit of totality of existence. So it's partial, it's not whole. Through a process that we experience love and the lover is the bridge. We become the wise, which is the collective wisdom. And this wise and that wise are different because this is a partial wisdom and that is the collective wisdom, the intelligence and wisdom of the bigger picture rather than just a partial. Faradarmani is a type of complementary and alternative therapy that is considered as a subdivision of interuniversal ontology, Erfan Halqeh. In this type of therapy, the patient is tapped or linked to the interuniversal consciousness via the Faratherapist. Following this procedure, the patient undergoes the scanning process by interuniversal consciousness. Scanning means that the patient's entire existence is diagnosed by the interuniversal consciousness, which discreetly discovers the patient's past and current illness record. Scanning takes place in a holistic manner, affecting all aspects of one's body, psyche, and mind. Sometimes during scanning, certain symptoms appear that indicates the body's susceptibility to a particular disease that could emerge in the near future. How do we run the halqeh? We talked about it, how we approach the quality world, because the halqeh is just a metaphor of the quality aspects of interuniversal consciousness, particularly positive intelligence network, which is evolving aspects of consciousness. For us interacting with a quality world, what we need to do is to intend to that aspect of consciousness. And how we do it is through nazar, or intention. What that is, to rely on our logic or our mind less and interact it more of a quality perspective. If you want to explain intention, the best way is to make an example of how we form a thought in our mind. How long it would take us to form an idea in our mind. For example, if you wanted to say, I want to open a link, or I want to intend to Faradarmani link, or I want to open Faradarmani link for someone. This is a very time-consuming process. It takes a lot of time for us to form that sentence, and if we want to go further and make that shorter, we might just have a glimpse of that sentence in our mind. The shorter that process goes in our mind, we are more close to the idea of nazar, or intention. I know it's very hard for us to getting close to that understanding at this point, because we are so used to receiving things that we are doing something for it. So right now, we are making it very simple as we don't need to do anything in order to get connected with Supreme Consciousness. And then we go further and we want to even not do anything to the extent of not even forming any sentence in our mind, even though we still want to do it. So it's kind of like contradictory in a sense, but because it's a quality aspect, of course, the words are not enough to explain it. The intention, or nazar, is basically how we interact with the quality aspects of consciousness, or positive intelligence network. So after we intend to that, after even the idea passed through our mind that we wanted to receive the link, or we wanted to open the link for someone, the link is already open. How do we run the halqeh? We intend to it, which basically means we put the info about our expectation on the intent and send a request to unmanifested consciousness, and it responds through the operator, which is interuniversal consciousness. This whole process is a very short moment in our mind. So the shorter it is, the better it is. However, when we opening this link for others, it really doesn't matter how we do it. The effect of it is not changed. But if we do it for ourselves, we might receive a higher quality if that is shorter. The shorter it is, the better it is. One of the goals of this semester is to have a conclusion that this connection is not dependent on any skills of ours. So the more of selfless we become, less involved we are in the process of it, the more effective it becomes. So as you can see in the picture, interuniversal consciousness has a lot of different aspects, and one aspect of it is healing. And under that healing, one forms of providing it is through Faradarmani links. There's other types of links that also helps us heal in different ways, but tonight we are focusing on Faradarmani. Perception or worldview. An individual's interpretation of their surroundings, the material and non-material world, and external events are reported to their brain via their senses, and then passes through a filter and framework, which we call perceptual or worldviewing filter. This filter is programmed in advance based on the type of thinking, experiences, personal understanding, culture, education, and environmental effects. Then it accordingly evaluates the intensity and weakness of the current events, their existential values, and other criteria. So basically, what perception filter does is to evaluate the intensity and weakness of any event that we encounter. For example, let's talk about bus that comes late at bus station. There might be many people waiting for the same bus. Someone might get upset much more than another person. Or maybe we could say that maybe they had different experiences in their day affecting their behavior or reaction to the same circumstances. But what about accidental or surprising explosion? So in the same room, if explosion happens, which relatively on a physical level is the same for everyone, how come someone might laugh, someone might faint, someone might cry, or all these different various reactions to the same intensity, to same explosion? The reason that those reactions and behaviors are different is because the perception filter is programmed in a different way, doing the process of evaluation differently. Then that's why the same physical external stimulus could have different effects on others. How we perceive the world, for example, if we are programmed in a way that that explosion is very harsh for us, then of course we faint. If someone enjoyed a lot of fireworks before, that might be very fun. So they would actually enjoy or laugh or get excited. And the reaction could be various depending on how they've been programmed through those circumstances that we mentioned, like their personal experience, their culture, their education system, etc. Perception or worldview filter, in a broad sense, can be defined as the individual's interpretation of themselves and the universe. The mind's perceptual reaction to an event is manifested only after the event passes through the filter of perception, and then, according to the programs inside the framework, our conception of that event is finally formed. Any event, we perceive it through our five senses. We see it, we hear it, we smell it, we touch it. The information that is being received by those physical senses are being sent to brain. The brain would translate that and it would be passed on to perception filter or worldview filter. And then the perception filter will evaluate the intensity or weakness of it and then give that information to the mental body. And the mental body would send the information to the emotional body, determining which type of reaction is necessary for that event. And then it would send to emotional body. Then the emotional body would produce the appropriate chemical that is matched with the information that is received from the mental body, which earlier it evaluated by the perception and worldview filter based on their intensity and weakness. So that's how that information goes to brain, and the brain sends command for specific chemical production or physical reaction to external stimulus, and a person reacts. So that physical reaction that we see from individuals in different circumstances is based on their perception and worldview, how they program themselves or the society programmed themselves. So something could alter their experience, that it might not affect the other person's experience. There's another example. People are put in hypnosis state, and through the placebo effect, if they're suggestible, they put in a hypnosis state, and then they're being suggested that they're going to be experiencing an ice on their hand, and the person would actually put a very hot object on their hand that in the real world could actually cause blister. But the person would still report the hot object information as very cold, like ice cube. And this is like basically being done. The other experiment was that the person is suggested that very hot object's going to be put on their hand, and they actually put the ice cube on their hand, and then the person actually experienced blisters on their hand. So this is basically what happens if the person's perception filter sending wrong information to the mental body, and the mental body would send the wrong information to the emotional body, and emotional body to the brain, then the result of the reaction or the physical reaction to that external stimulus would be completely the opposite of the reality that we're used to. So we could alter a lot of our physical experiences by having different worldview or perception. And if we define something for ourselves in a very particular way, then our experience of it would be as we suggested. And if we go the otherwise, of course, we get a different result. This is not very easy to do if you want to do it on a self-relying method, because this filter is programmed throughout a lot of time. And of course, if we want to reprogram that by our own will, relying on ourselves, they're going to take a lot of time. But there are a lot of links in Interuniversalism that will help us to shift our worldview and perception. And the theoretical would complement the journey to make it easier, and we can actually achieve those qualities much faster. Breakdown of reaction to data input. Basically, the data input is the information that we receive through external stimulus by our physical receptors. There are 3 different types of receptors. Number 1 receptors is the physical receptors, which is the 5 senses, all the information and data that we receive through the 5 senses. The second one is a mental receptor that receives data received by semi-conscious. For example, a notice that we just saw for a second and passed by it without paying attention to its detail, the content of that image is detected by these receptors. Or another example is you go to someone's place and there's a lot of things on the table, and then you leave, and if someone asks you, okay, what was exactly on the table, in what position, you might not really remember all the details. But all those details are stored in the mental body and perceived by the mental receptor. So that's how we can access all those detailed information when we are in a hypnosis state. There's another receptors, which is ultramental receptor, that receives metaphysical data. For example, data received through intuition, revelation, dream reality, etc. So how we operate, like for example, colors that we can't see in a physical reality, when we see it in a dream, how we can receive that information is through the ultramental receptors. That is beyond what is here. This is a nice chart to explain what we explained just now. The outside event and incident which happens in the universe, it goes through our brain sensors, and then it passes through the worldview filter, and after that it would be sent to the mental body, and the mental body would have its own data and information which is passed through the psychical body or psyche, and then the information will be passed on to the physical body. Brain would translate that reaction into body's language, chemical reaction, and we can see the display of mental changes, displaying psychical changes, and displaying physical changes, and all via brain. There's 2 other sections here that the worldview rooted filter. It goes to our reaction of subconscious. And the reaction of subconscious is something that we react to it suddenly, and sometimes it's not the most optimal way that we do it, but then we catch ourselves afterward. So this is basically based on this pre-programmed software that it runs in a specific circumstances. For example, that explosion. The moment that explosion happens to the moment that the person faints, it's so short that there's no place for rethinking that behavior or reaction, and it just happens. Then there is like an impression reaction that we talk about it in a moment. Definition of depression and interuniversalism. When the software-based worldviewing filter interprets outside events with a negative outlook, the emotional body produces negative emission. This emission is capable of contaminating and affecting other individuals within its vicinity. This means that depression can affect those who come into contact with the depressed individual. As the Iranian proverb says, the disheartened soul disheartens the company. Among those who are at high risk of being contaminated by this negative emission are psychiatrists. In summary, our thoughts have either a negative or positive aspect, positive emission. Positive thoughts produce positive emission that is followed by positive and flourished spirit, and of course the negative thoughts has negative emission and it would follow by negative moods. Mental depression is the second stage of depression. So the first, the person is in the emission depression stage, which is the emission of the person contains that depression emission that might affect others that we just discussed. After that, it gets to the mental depression. This is the second stage of depression after perception contamination that engages the individual's mind. Thus, the influences of negative thoughts will gradually appear in the individual. However, in this stage, the individual is still capable of expressing positive emotions such as laughter and humor. So, in the mental depression, you cannot really see it. Sometimes you can see it because it affects the people's thoughts in a negative way. So you might observe a mild pessimistic operation in individuals, or having negative opinions about most of the things, but still they are able to show positive mood related expressions, like they're still be able to laugh or have a humor. After that, the third stage is the emotional depression. And this is a stage in which the engagement of the depression expands from the mind into psyche. Thus, the individual's emotion tends to be negative, and in this stage, signs of disheartened and withered spirit can be observed in the individual. So at this point, we are starting to observe the depression on the surface for the expressions that we can observe in people. After that, we have physical depression. Finally, this condition finds its way into the physical body of the individual, where the signs of depression can be observed through changes in his facial expression. The speech and movement also take on a certain shape, followed by the blockage of entrance of positive emissions, including the interuniversal consciousness. If you remember, we talked about the reasons that we are not feeling, or we might not feel, the scans of interuniversal consciousness. And one reason was depression. So if someone's dealing with depression, they might not feel the scans because the information is being blocked. And there's a blockage of entrance of the positive emission. So we will talk about this later in depth. We are only able to operate either on a positive mood or negative mood at the time being. So we cannot be sad and happy at the same time. We might fluctuate very quickly if we want to, but it's impossible to be happy, sad at the same time. When we are in a negative mood or negative state, anything positive we cannot receive. When we are in a positive state, anything negative would not affect us if we remain in it. So how the emotional body, which is responsible for our emotion, operates, is either have a filtration or block to a positive moods or positive emissions, or negative emissions or negative moods. In this stage, ultimately, the whole being of the individual is completely enveloped by depressive emission. They will reach a condition which is called the stage of silence death. In this stage, the individual will lose all their cognitive communication with the outside world, and everything will lose its meaning. And even if they understand the meaning of things, what they see or hear will not create any motivation in them. So most of the time, it gets to the point that they don't want to get out of the bed. They really don't want to do anything. Even if they have kids and their kids wants to interact with them, they're very neutral toward them. They cannot show any signs of laughter or a shift of emotion at all. Therefore, among those who initially do not properly feel the interuniversal consciousness connection are the depressed people who might not feel the scanning process and its flow at all, or might feel the scanning flow only up to a certain point in their body. In this way, we can examine the extent of the physical body that is affected by the negative emission of the depression. If you remember, we did that depression test. You can observe the energy flow penetration to your body and determine how much your physical body is affected by the depression emission. And of course, through linking, gradually those open up and the energy flows and the depression can be lifted by only few sessions of Faradarmani. Testing the existence of percepting depression via the vital force scan. This is what we've done last time. Upon applying the vital force scanning on an individual, you realize that when the vital force moves through the body, it penetrates up to a certain area where it is stopped and blocked. The individual reports feeling a kind of force that blocks the movement of the flow. This gives us an estimation, the area in the body which is under the influence of negative emission of depression. By continuing the treatment process, continuous scanning, the vital force gradually makes its way toward the center of the brain, and the negative energy of depression will be neutralized and depression will be treated. So of course there's hope. There is nothing that Interuniversalism would talk about and just tell people that, okay, there's so many things that you should be worried about. Let me give you another one and leave you alone. So there's always solutions and helps of consciousness that can be provided and helps us to resolve. So the cause of depression might be many things, but mostly is worldview or perception. Our expectation of life, our opposition to the principles of natural law, the justice in place in the nature, and the conflicts that we might have about anything. Someone might have a conflict about their body, how they look, the country they're born, the area that they live, the situation that they went through, etc., etc. And then that conflict, if it's being sustained and continued, then it gets to a level of depression. It's mostly opposition or conflict with something, and it usually comes from a faulty worldview or perception. It is very difficult for us to go through certain experiences and not expect or not go to a negative state or negative mood. I totally understand that. The ultimate goal of Interuniversalism is to provide us enough support and help so we can cultivate those qualities, not in a self-relying method, but through the links that would be provided in future. So whatever we talk about in Interuniversalism course, we are not gonna relying on our own ability to get to those points or alter things that are against our ideal self or against our idea of ourself. We are basically introducing the operations of within and the natural laws and the functionalities so we can learn more about them, why certain things are the way they are and how they function, and then providing quality tools that we can resolve those by the help of Supreme Consciousness. Faradarmani component. The number one, consciousness scan, discussed in previous slide. Number two is vital forces scan, Kundalini, life force, or cosmic force. Vital force is one of the subcategories of interuniversal consciousness and is derived from the universal consciousness and flows throughout the universe as a force. Within one session of Faradarmani, the ability to feel this force is entrusted by the tutor to the Faratherapist, who, by moving his hand through the air, can feel this force and become conscious of the fact that we are immersed in it, which we experienced in the previous session. The vital force is like water that flows through a field, without which all of the vegetation would dry up and perish. Additionally, all vegetation benefits from this water, regardless of their type or species. Number three is a polarity field scan. While conducting primary research on the human being body's polarity field, researchers became aware that one of the causes of illness in human beings could be related to a disturbance in this field. Polarity field scan is something that you introduced last session. By moving the hand within a few centimeters of the patient's body, the patient is exposed to the polarity field of the therapist's hand. This encounter results in a kind of movement or shift in the patient's polarity field. Consequently, the electron's movement and ion exchange within their body will intensify, and if their illness is related to that, this action proves successful and leads to the improvement of the body's polarity field, which subsequently cures the illness. In Faradarmani, the paratherapist has no need to apply polarity therapy with their hand as used in polarity therapy, because the polarity field will be automatically corrected wherever required through the link to the interuniversal consciousness. Basically, when you open the Faradarmani, if it needs to adjust the polarity field, it does automatically. In short distance treatment method, it is only the interuniversal consciousness that guides the treatment process, and the paratherapist is not in charge of choosing this method unless they want to test it for their own experience. So if you are offering a treatment or a healing session to someone, we don't need to use the polarity scan or healing with the life force. We only open Faradarmani because that's a full package, and it will automatically diagnose what is need to be done on the individual's body, and it would resolve. Disorder in polarity field. The reasons that the polarity field is being disrupted is technological life, metal and electric current, wave pollution, radio waves, radiation, wireless waves, etc. Conductivity pollution. This is caused by the existence of synthetic insulators and artificial products that inhibit or limit the ion electron exchange between the human body and the ground. Polyester socks or rubbery shoes, the metal structure of the house, apartments, cars, which is a fully metal structure, and all the rubbers. So anything that basically disturbs that direct interaction and exchange of ion and electrons with ground and the air. And another thing is effect of solar planets and stars. How it affects people is basically to disturbing their polarity field, which may cause exhaustion or low temperament, etc. Why we may not feel anything in the link, we talked about this, it's worth mentioning. Mind chatter and scatter in the cluttered mind. Depression, mental blocks, not being present in the halqeh or link. Different types of connection in Faradarmani link. Tonight, you're going to receive short distance applying Faradarmani. There's two different ways that we can open Faradarmani for people. One is long distance, another one is short distance. Short distance means that the individual, the patient, is in the same room that we are or in the same house that we are. And the long distance would be when an individual is far from us, not as far as, like, for example, in a big house, we are here and they're in the next room. But when, for example, in an apartment, we are in the second floor, they're in the 13th floor. That would be long distance, or as long as the other side of the planet. Because consciousness is not limited by time and space, so when we open Faradarmani, it doesn't need to be in the same place after we receive the long distance link next sessions. Tonight, we are only able to open Faradarmani link for people that are in our close distance. In each subcategories, long distance and short distance, there's also ways to approach it. One, with no touch, healing with interuniversal consciousness, and healing and scan via vital force that we explored the first session. So without touch, we could either use healing with interuniversal consciousness or vital force. But since we have interuniversal consciousness, which the Faradarmani, which is the full package, then we use that. We don't really need to use it. It was just for the sake of exploration and the access that we have. So if someone talks about it, we know about it, and we have it. With touch, which is suggested that we avoid doing it with touch for many reasons. First of all, if we want to touch, we need to ask consent and make sure that the person is ready to receive that or would like to receive it. And the other reason is we don't want to draw individuals' attention to our hand or something that it comes from us rather than the direct connection to the Supreme Consciousness. So we put an effort. We try to reduce the touch as much as possible and only do healing from distance so the individual could understand that it's not coming from us and have a better understanding the functionality of consciousness. But in some cases, they might feel better if they receive a support like that. And we need to emphasize on it's not coming from us. And if we clarify that, it's okay if they would like a support, if they need to be held or something like that. So with touch, there's local treatment. We can put our hand gently in a certain areas and open Faradarmani. We're not trying to direct anything. While we're doing this, we only put our hand on the specific spot that we choose or the person asks us. But it's not like that we're trying to guide Faradarmani to treat that area first. Because Faradarmani always scans and finds the roots of the problem and also it starts the healing process based on the priority. Maybe we have a headache, but then when we open Faradarmani, we see the symptoms working on the back, and we might not know the reason, but maybe that's a more prior thing that needs to be done, or maybe that's the more important thing that by the eyes of consciousness needs to be done. Another way is non-local treatment, only under the guidance of the network, which means that if we open link for someone, the link is automatically scanning us as well. So as soon as we open the link, the process of scan initiates for ourselves as well. And if we become neutral observer to the point that we're not really trying to guide anything, then we might experience a force coming to us that actually guides us or directs us to a treatment with touch or getting our hand closer to certain areas. So that is basically the guidance of the network itself. Some people go to that state and then they find their hand wanting to go toward the individual's head or like their neck or their back. And that's basically what we mean by the treatment only under the guidance of the network. So there's 3 different ways that it can manifest, and we can also use this for specific purposes. I can talk about it in depth and detail. There's shock, injection, and channel. So if someone, let's say they had spinal cord injury, and they're paralyzed, we can gently put our hand in their leg or on their head and applying injection or channel. And what that does is forming a channel that shoots the consciousness through that channel. So it would run that healing force. So it would initiate or heal the aspects that the person could see some symptoms of movement. I don't want to really get deep into it. I come back to this later when I talk about aspects of our existence and how that's related to shock or injection. But for now, know that we can put our hand gently on someone's leg or their neck, for example, if they have a spinal cord injury, and then we intend to Faradarmani, specifically shock and injection, and then they might feel like a shooting force in their body, and then it might start a healing, or we might start seeing an improvement in their existence. And the last one is the treatment via interuniversal consciousness guidance, that it could take any form. And of course, there's long distance. We talk about it next session because we're going to receive that in the next session. How does Faradarmani helps us to grow up? One, practical acquaintance with the interuniversal consciousness. So if you remember, we were talking about how our physical reality is made of consciousness, and the entire physical reality is an illusion. And we were establishing an understanding that if the connection to the Supreme Consciousness would be possible, if we could use those benefits or use that connection for a healing purpose or harmonizing purpose. So through Faradarmani link, we get to have an ability to explore the existence of the healing aspects of consciousness. So if we say, well, our physical reality is made of consciousness, someone would say, how do you know? If we say the consciousness exists, someone would say, how do you know? How we answer is, we don't know either. Let's try together. So if we see statistic-based results and have a repeatable result that we can see in the people, so if you have like a 10 people, 100 people, not one or two, because we can't make sure that they're actually being a neutral observer or not. And that would not be a good determination that whether it works or not. So when we encountering 10 or 100 people, for example, if we are able to use a functionality of consciousness that we are saying we could, and someone could be there and observe that we're not doing anything, we're not using the power of words to suggest or using a placebo effect. We're not spending time for preparation at all, preparing people, individual in a specific way, so it would work. So if we just sit in a room, number of people, and for the first time, we close our eyes, and we start like feeling something is shifting. If even 70 people among the 100, or even 50 people among the 100 would see a result, and we could repeat this experiment, this is science. Most of the things that are in the science, and we consider it as a science fact, is based on the statistics. We experimented with them, we received the repeatable results, and then they became a fact even though we didn't know how they function. How do we know? Like if someone would say, how do you know something like electricity exists back then? Well, we wouldn't have an answer. We would say, okay, come to my lab, I show you, right? So this is the quality world lab that we're getting access to, so we can explore it for ourselves unconditionally. So we don't need to like spend so much time on going to certain practices or eating this or trying that or reading this or changing that in order to get a quality experience. But we can have a natural quality experience with the direct connection to the link and have an inner confirmation of the hypothesis and the theories that is being presented, which is no longer a theory because it's a fact now. By this time, it thousands of case studies is proven that the Faradarmani works and the consciousness exists. So it's a practical way to explore it and invite people to be a researcher with us to examine whether such a thing exists and whether we can use it for the betterness of humanity. The second is it helps us to get rid of ego and becoming more selfless oriented in a way that we realize that we don't need to rely on anyone else. No one needs to rely on us. So the opportunity for people to take advantage of people's weakness or condition to boost their ego or show off, it reduces, because even if one person go out and say that use Faradarmani for such a purposes, then there's hundreds of other people that would reveal that it does not need to be dependent and it could be achieved independently. The number 3 is practical God's servitude by helping the manifestation of God in our reality. If we agree that everything is made of consciousness and that there is a designer, you can call it God, you can call it beloved, you can call it whatever you want. The words are only the contract between us to convey a mean or know what we talk about. So of course, everyone would have their own interpretation of a word and what that means. But in Interuniversalism, we're gonna define all these things in a very specific way, and we are developing a new terminology so people would be on the same page. If we are talking about God, for example, talking about consciousness, talking about natural laws, we can have an inner confirmation of those as well. So if we agree that designer exists, we call it God, and we discuss that everything that exists is basically from consciousness that governs the entire universe and gives electron information how to move or dance in a particular way that forms the infinite forms of manifestation, then everything becomes an image. You remember what that image of the fan, image circle, that was the image of the orbit of the blade of the fan. So every manifestation would be the image of beloved. Not the beloved itself, but the face of beloved. It's an image of beloved. And if we get to that level, that understanding, that innate level comprehension, then we see everything as a face of beloved. And we cannot have any antagonism or opposition to anything that exists in our universe, even things that it would not be in our favor, at the same time that we are drawing boundaries and standing against injustice. So the Faradarmani and the links helps us to have this inner confirmation that it proves it to us that the consciousness exists. There is a designer that created this consciousness, and from that place, it gives us the opportunity to be able to serve with such a beautiful purpose of helping others, healing them without making them dependent on a drug or being very costly or harming their body with chemicals. Then we start recognizing our inner treasure, that we are holding and carrying a treasure within, that if we find out about it, we can change the entire experience for humanity collectively. Another one is a practical solution for elevating collective awareness for collective refuge. We'll talk about that in depth in future. It's a practical way to become aware of all these aspects of existence that proves us how much we are limiting ourselves, how little we know about our reality, and the truth behind it. Let's receive Faradarmani close distance, and here's some report, and I would explain more about how we can offer it to people and also interact with it. One of the aspects of Faradarmani is sleep pattern correction, and what that does is would correct the sleeping pattern. For one individual, the expulsion might be the lack of sleep for some time, and for another individual might be a tendency to sleep more. And ultimately, it would adjust, and it would also increase the quality of our dream in terms of like the vividity and being purposeful. So it's not just like something that it really doesn't make any sense and it's all over the place. It's more like something meaningful and vivid. And this is basically the ultimate correction of the sleeping pattern. You would have meaningful, vivid, and purposeful dreams that, regardless of the time that we are in, after that we feel energized and well rested. And another aspect of Faradarmani also would bring up childhood fears. So if anything like that would come up, it's basically parts of this gap.
Is it like for temporary, like for some minutes, or like for weeks or days?
It could be both, depending on every individual. For some, might resolve in a second. For some, might resolve in a couple days or a week, maybe. But usually, it doesn't last long. I would like to explain a little more about how we can open Faradarmani and how we can use it, and also how we should offer it to others. In order for us to get a good result with Faradarmani, we should ask people to give us a time that they're comfortable sitting in a comfortable place, that they can commit at least for 15 minutes in undisturbed, uninterrupted place, that they can close their eyes and observe. So that could be multiple hours in a day. If they miss one, they can do the other one. For your information, as soon as you open Faradarmani for them, it's 24/7. But the reason that we need to ask for time is a commitment. So at the end of the day, you could understand that whether the person actually did it and didn't get the result or they didn't. Another example that Dr. Tar uses as well is that imagine that two people wanting to meet. You say, okay, where are we going to meet? You say, okay, whenever. That might never happen, you know? So, but we say like 6 o'clock, everyone expects 6 o'clock to be in the place. So, similar way, when we want to open a Faradarmani for someone, we ask them what are the time that you can sit at least for 15 minutes and close your eyes and be comfortable in any position that you want and be open to receive the link. We don't need to know about that time. We don't need to be aware at that time. We're going to do whatever we are doing at the time. We're going to take care of our life going through the day. As soon as you put that individual's name in your list, so we're going to make a list and we're going to write the individual's time and, for example, name. And for now, we're going to only open it for a short distance. For example, you meet someone, you offer them Faradarmani, and then you ask them when is a good time in the day that you can receive the benefits or receive the link. And then you put it in your list. You don't need to kind of like be aware at that time. You just intend that every day, and that's it. The individual would receive it if you do it for them. So if you open a link for someone and they don't know that you're opening, so this is not a consensual link, you can open it for someone without asking consent because it's only healing. If you do it one way, then the chances of receiving results is 30%. But if it's two-way, meaning that the other individual is aware of it and they're cooperating, then the chance is up to 70%. And of course, the remaining of the 30% of no chance is to not stopping death because it's necessary for the balance of ecosystem and for our evolution. So we will talk about that, how that would help our evolution. But for now, if you want to offer someone, the easiest approach is if someone having a headache or dealing with a problem, we want to offer it, we can just simply say, close your eyes and observe how you're feeling. So without triggering the logic filter to what it is possible or what it is and how does it work, and etc. We are asking them to be a neutral observer and then report what they're feeling as they're experiencing, and then we can explain afterwards. And when we want to explain what that is, we can use the internet analogy. We are immersed by Wi-Fi, but we are not necessarily connected to it. We can receive the benefits once we are connected to Wi-Fi. We can use more of the functionality of our device once we download apps, receiving updates, etc. And if someone challenges further, we invite them to be a researcher and explore it with us from the perspective of neutral observation, which is required. So that is how we use Faradarmani and how we can offer it to others. For now, it's a short distance again. You can open it for yourself as well. We're not guiding it. We're not saying which area should work or not, and hope you receive the benefits. For more information, you can go back to the other videos that is posted. Thanks for watching.